Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, and a good evening to all of our participants here tonight. Welcome to the monthly date with Perdaus, a monthly online engagement with the community in discussing religious and current issues. The objectives of our meet today is to make this an educational platform for the community's benefit, inshallah. And before we begin, let's begin with Al-Fatihah so that Allah bless our event with barakah and that our event will proceed smoothly, inshallah. Al-Fatihah. Ameen, Ameen, Ya Rabbil Alameen. May Allah make this a very beneficial session for all of us. Now, this will be our program for today. Yeah, we will have two parts to the presentation. One of it being the presentation by our speaker, and the second one will be our question and answer. Now, a bit about our speaker today. So as you can see, we will be discussing the topic on gender and sexuality, and especially a guide for concerned parents. And our objective for today is to give clarity and guidance to parents in a respectful and sensitive manner on LGBT topics in raising our children with Islamic values. Today, we have Mr. Mohd Khair Noor, who's the right person for the job. He is a marriage and family consultant and veteran community leader and the founder of Suchi Success Initiatives, a consultancy together with his wife, Madam Suryati Abdullah. He's not new to the sexuality education scene, having designed, developed and delivered sexuality education programs for various ministries and agencies such as HPB, MSF, MOE, MOIS, Malay Muslim organizations, churches and temples, as well as other locals and regional NGOs. Thousands of participants from various ethnicities, faith and other backgrounds have benefited from the sexuality education programs run by Mr. Mohd Khair and his team. And this includes for parents, foster parents, teachers from kindergarten to secondary schools, counselors, trainers, caregivers, young adults, teenagers, and so on. Now, without further ado, I would now like to invite Brother Khair to the stage.
Right. A'udzubillahi samil alim minasyaitonir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wa bihi nasta'in ala umuri dunya waddin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah. Grateful to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala for giving us the opportunity to be here this evening. Look forward to discussing some key issues. Some may view it as sensitive, but I think we have to mature as a community. Even how sensitive things may be, I think we should just enter into discussions in a civil manner and address issues as they raise in the community. I think now, as mentioned by our moderator, we have, as indicated in the topic itself, gender and sexuality, a guide and concern of parents. I think now we know today there is no way in which such a topic, I don't want to use the word sensitive because we need to be able to discuss this openly. So not to label it as sensitive all the way, otherwise we will never get things done. So such topic, we need to address them. And I must also say openly to help everyone in the community understand what the issues involve. In my little work that I've done, even certain words may affect how discussions may proceed. In my mind, as much as we should so-called desensitize the topic, at the same time, we cannot also, we want to desensitize, but at the same time, I hope we would also position ourselves in such a way that we are not too sensitive to certain words that are being used in our discussion, in our conversation. In the course of doing this work, and of course, when we look at how things have evolved in the world today, we will find that actually some people may find certain approaches that Muslims take, certain stand that we take seem to be offending to some people. They use labels like intolerant, bigot, and all those things. But at the same time, sometimes I realize it is okay for others to offend us, but when we respond, they say that we're offending them. So I think it's pretty unfair. On that note, I think all of us will have to have that level-headedness to actually discuss in a respectful way, in a civil way, so eventually we can help. In this context today, in our discussion today, we are looking at how we can help concerned parents navigate some challenging situations that they may have. This is not surprising anymore. This is not the 70s or the 80s or even so-called the 90s. So we are now in a different millennium altogether. So I think it is important for parents to have some kind of guide. Okay, this is something which I also want to mention. the platform tonight, it is not an intellectual discourse to discuss issues on the differences of definition of gender, sexuality, and the position I think is very clear. We are taking the mainstream Muslim position. So I'm not going to go sideways, left or right, whatsoever. We are looking at the majority of Muslims. How do we view issues on gender and sexuality? This is also based on the views of traditional ulama. When I say traditional, doesn't mean they lived thousands of years ago, but they are contemporary ulama, but they hold on to traditional definitions of how Islam should be held as a belief system. Okay, so I don't want to go into a debate on the various interpretations of even the meaning of Fatihah, for example. Okay, there are the various interpretations. I don't to go into the area as far as we're concerned, and as far as Perdaus is concerned, I think we just want to help parents based on prevailing understanding of majority of Muslims and ulama in Singapore, especially on what the issues are all about. So I want to make it very clear upfront. This is not an intellectual discourse. This platform is actually to help parents figure things out. Should there be any disagreement, probably there will be another platform. In fact, these past few days, I understand there are also other opportunities for discourse probably. So, Ken, so I think I want to set the matter clear. Let's get the thing going, Ken. So, I think Perdaus has actually introduced this program as one way to help parents figure things out on how to help their children figure things out. Okay, I use the word figure things out because it can be very confusing today. And even some parents find it also confusing on some of the terms used even by their own children. So as you can see, we will visit some of the definitions of sexuality, but eventually I want to point to what Islam says about sexuality and gender at the end of the day. Currently, there's a spread of interpretation, so to speak, but I think at the end of the day, as far as going by the majority Muslim opinion on the matter, we'll just look at some very core definition of what those things are all about. So these are the objectives of the session. We hope at the end of the session, parents will be able to explain the meaning of sexuality within, especially within the context of Islam. Because you will find later, I will also share with you the definition of sexuality by some quarters, and those quarters may not look at religion as the basis for action, as the basis for behavior, as the belief system. So we are not looking at that. So we are looking at within the context of Islam, what should it be? The meaning of gender, again, within the context of Islam. Of course, there are other types of gender. Later, you will see there's a range of meaning of gender, which I think I myself, when I look at those things to really understand and comprehend, they could be pretty confusing. You need to go through one by one, but I'm not going to go through individually one by one because that's not the objective of this session. The objective is to help parents to have a clarity of idea on what gender is all about. But I just want to show how out there are different interpretations and meaning of the term gender. So we need to be mindful of that. We may also want to find out the factors leading to how children think, to how children behave, to how things may affect their sexuality in the first place as they are growing up. And also how can parents look out for telltale signs that children may need help. This is important. In the course of our work, we find it may not be as easy to say that they are like that. Usually what we discover is there are other extenuating factors sometimes, but also sometimes things within the family that may affect the way the children grow up and affect their sexuality and how they look at their own gender. And very important is actually the next one, identify ways to develop strong parent-child bonds in the wake of challenging environment that we are living in today. I think that's very key. Many a times we discover that the lack of bond, strong relationship between parent and child contribute towards the child growing up in a certain way. We have conducted programs where youth have crossed the line. They have been placed under probation, that kind of stuff. And when we run programs together with our parents, we discovered actually one major area that's lacking in their life was that strong bond. And the lack of that strong bond resulted in them getting into some kind of issues, challenges, and trouble, of course, and trouble with the law. Many aspects to it. They committed crimes and all those things. So that strong parent-child bond is super important. Okay, then the last thing is the do's and don'ts. Should parents come across or experience or their children suddenly tell them, look, I'm so and so, I'm like this and that. Okay, so what do you do? So I think this is what we hope to do for this 1.5 to 2, I think maximum 2 hour session that we are having right now. If you have any questions, please reserve it to the end. I won't say the end, but at the end of my presentation, we have about 45 minutes to an hour to actually help you navigate questions that you may have to ask. So what is the meaning of sexuality? I just give you a very general one. Okay, this is important. It's not necessary that I show it here. This is what I subscribe to, but I just want to show you as an example. And I want to highlight some of the issues in the definition itself. Okay, what is sexuality? About how our bodies, seemingly, how we understand about relationship. I think a few days ago, I was on Warna Media Corp, and one of the important aspects of sexuality is basically about oneself, about our own body, understanding how our own body respond to things, and also about relationship. So this is also partly in line with that. Our values, our beliefs, desires, whatsoever, our thoughts, our feelings. So these are things that made up the kind of sexuality makeup, I must say, of who we are. So sexuality is something that parents need to be very clear about. Nothing vulgar. Okay, when you talk about sexual education, it's also not about sex education. It is not about teaching kids on how to do it. In fact, in the context of Singapore, we are looking at abstinence only approach, so to speak. So we are helping children to be careful about not to get involved in unhealthy relationship, not to do sex in the first place, wait until they go into marriage, that kind of stuff. So again, coming back to the definition of sexuality, it is important to understand, based on this definition itself, you will find that actually it is making the person as the main reference point. The guiding principle in living such a meaning of sexuality is based on this statement: exploring our own sexuality rooted within the principles of consent and sexual rights. So that part I find it quite troubling, because they do not have any other reference point except the principles of consent and sexual rights. Even recently, a few months ago in Parliament too, there was a little discussion on sexuality issues, and the principles of consent and sexual rights have also been raised. It is understandable within the context of a secular environment, so such things may come about. But as far as Muslims are concerned, I think we have to rely on our reference point cannot be just simply the principles of consent and sexual right. It has to be more than that. So if you can see in the definition here, look at the second paragraph. The most important thing to understand about sexuality is that it is self-defined. That is that every person is allowed to talk about and understand their own sexuality in their own way that makes sense to them. That part on making sense to them, I find as a Muslim, from the Islamic point of view, to me that's a little troubling. But the reason why I bring this up is because on many occasions, when there are discussions on sexuality, we must understand this is where many people come from. And based on some of the questions already submitted to Perdaus early on, when I go through them, and I can see why children, youth ask questions to their parents, because they have been introduced to the idea of sexuality from whatever sources, doesn't matter, for our sources. That idea of sexuality is based on the second paragraph, for example. Okay, I have my own right to think and feel the way I think I am. That feeling that I have right now validates the decision that I wish to make or I have made as far as my sexuality and gender is concerned. So the self is the basis for action, which in Islam, later we'll talk about a bit. Okay, but I must also qualify myself. Within this short period of time on this platform, I'm not going to dwell so much into interpreting the Quran or whatever, because this is not my area, but I'm just making reference to it in broad terms, how at the end of the day, our sources in Islam should be the basis upon which individuals should get guidance from, and not so much just based on one's feelings and thinking. Okay, so that's something very important. Okay, the next one is, as you can see here, sexuality is dynamic and always changing. Okay, this is important. So when it is always changing and dynamic, at the end of the day, how do we manage this so-called dynamism and change? There has to be a framework. I always believe that everywhere we go, there should be a frame of reference that can help us make sense. Okay, is not just based on our own feelings and thinking, but okay, being Muslims, I must qualify myself. Being Muslims, we need to make reference to something. In this case, we know very clear it is the Quran and the Sunnah, and of course the guidance from the companions, tabi'in until the scholars today, on how do we navigate our lives in general. And of course, within the issues of sexuality and gender, there are clear guidelines as to how we should be presenting ourselves. Later I will just share with you the meaning of gender identity, orientation, and all those things. Okay, but as of now, this is what I'm saying. It cannot be just the individual be the main frame of reference. It cannot be that the individual is the one who say that it is the right way to do only. We have to make that reference to, as far as Muslims are concerned, to our Creator, and of course to the Messenger of Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala. Okay, so I thought this is the reason why I bring this up, because we need to understand this is a definition that I can bring up general enough for parents to understand where arguments about gender and sexuality have been based on. This is roughly how some people are thinking about gender and sexuality. So we need to understand where they come from. In order for us to address the issues well with our children, we need to know in what manner they are thinking. Why are they thinking in that manner? Why are they thinking? Why are they saying certain things, that kind of stuff? Example, I saw one question, a young child asked the parents, why are certain groups of people with a certain way in their manifestation of sexuality being discriminated, so to speak. So it is not uncommon for such issues to be raised and allegations thrown at, okay, in this case, so-called the majority of Muslims, because recently even in the Samsung issue, we have been labeled to be homophobic, discriminatory, that kind of stuff. So you must understand where such labels thrown on us have come from. So this is one example of the thinking behind sexuality and gender of people who are probably not having religion as their basis for belief and action. So far, okay. So people with religion, in this case, and Muslims who have Islam as origin. So I'm challenging the way in which I'm just looking at this definition, challenging the way in which this definition has been put forth. But if anyone else want to agree with this, it's entirely up to them. But as far as Muslims are concerned, I think there's some issue here. So we know as Muslims, the guiding principle for all our action, belief, values, principles whatsoever, it must come primarily from the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, peace be upon him, and how the companions and eventually the generations of ulama after that have actually provided guidance all the way for us to have a meaningful journey in this life, in this temporal world. There's a lot, if you want to quote from the Quran and the Sunnah, of how we all know as Muslims that the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam must be our guideposts. We cannot discard that. So whatever feelings that we have about ourselves, whatever tendencies we have, whatever thinking that we have, and eventually whatever actions that we take, it has to be referred to that framework. And that framework, as Muslims, basically we cannot run away from the Quran and the Sunnah. And of course, in order for us to understand the Quran and the Sunnah, the Sunnah is supposed to help us to understand the Quran, but we know that actually for certain, because all of us are not probably not fluent in Arabic, or we don't master Arabic. So in order for us to understand, that's where the ulama come into play. The reason why I say this is because in the course of our work, we have actually come across individuals who are Muslims who even question the role of ulama in helping us to think about religion. So here I want to make it very clear, as far as this presentation is concerned, the role of ulama in helping Muslims understand the Quran and the Sunnah, we all know in general that it's super important. Without the ulama, and we know ulama is the warisatul anbiya, they are the descendants, so to speak, of the anbiya. In order for us to understand, they are the ones who actually help us understand the religion fully. Okay, so these are guide, inshallah. So in our mind, as far as sexuality of a Muslim is concerned, it must be based on Islamic belief, values, and principles, helping us, guiding us all the way to understand who we are as far as gender is concerned, to help us sift through our thought processes, our feelings, how our body is probably be managed by ourselves, the relationships that we have, and eventually our own actions or behavior. So I thought we are not discarding that general definition of sexuality that I just discussed, but as far as being Muslims are concerned, we cannot run away from the fact that Islamic beliefs, values, and principles do come into play to help us sort things out, to help us make sense. Okay, not surprising when someone asks, we've run quite a variety of programs, parenting, even intimacy programs for married couples. Example, people ask, I think about other women. I think about that. I think about it. So is it sinful or not? Some of these things have been discussed by ulama. Okay, it is nothing new at all. At the level of thinking, at the level of feeling, okay, how do we know that such thinking and feeling would be acceptable by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, would be okay as far as being Muslims are concerned? We have to refer back to the Quran and the Sunnah. Example, is it okay, to have the feeling, I think today I want to eat pork? Example, at the thought level, the pork looks nice, man. Okay, at the feeling level, thought level, whatever is inside, okay, as long as you process it properly. So someone may talk about, okay, the pork looks nice, I think I want to try it, give it a shot. But eventually, no lah. I don't think I can even go near and touch it, because this is not what Muslims are supposed to do. You see, we have this kind of thought processes. So people may have certain thinking, but in order for them to be able to understand whether those thinking are acceptable or not, this is where the guidance from Islam comes in. So likewise for sexuality of a Muslim. And some people ask me, okay, so what's the gender in Islam? We know in the Quran, as far as the genders are concerned, male and female mentioned 18 times and female 30 times. I'm not sure whether, as far as from the Quran that I learned, from the ulama that I learned, there's no other mention of other gender. These are the two genders generally have been mentioned in the Quran. And of course, we know, as far as the creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is concerned, we know there's somewhere so-called in between, so-called male and female. It is called the khunsa, where a minority of individuals may be born with two gender, biological gender. Okay, even some people call it physical gender. They have two organs, and eventually the parents will have to decide who is he or she going to be. Okay, we can discuss that later, inshallah. Right, I want to go into this. I promise to actually show. Okay, these are the types of sexuality out there that you can find. Okay, in the realm of sexuality and gender. I don't want to go into each of these. Nowadays, there's even this movement where they're trying to kill off gender, so to speak. They argue that there's no such thing as gender, no male, no female. Even the spelling for woman is spelled as WOMXN. They don't want to be associated with MAN, for example. So there are such movement where they begin to come up with alternative ways to identify persons of a certain character. So this is something which parents also need to understand. The kind of confusion that sometimes our children may be confronted with because they are exposed to various types of ideas about sexuality. So this could be one. I'm not going to discuss the individual ideas behind all these terms. This is just to show you how varied things are right now that may have led our children to be a bit more confused. Okay. Next. And also there's this thing called sexuality on the spectrum. Okay. Of course, some people may say that this is outdated. It was actually introduced in 1948, right, to help people understand. Okay, this is one instrument. This is one instrument to help people understand. What it says is basically individuals may be on a certain spectrum. There's even a tool. Okay, there's even a tool to help you identify in terms of your sexual orientation. Whether you are heterosexual 100% or whether you're homosexual 100% or whether you're in between. So those are aspects of sexuality that have been introduced in the industry or in the market, so to speak. And this is what Kinsey scale. Okay, there are some modifications to this today to help persons out there with different ways in which they feel about their sexuality and gender to make sense of their presence in this world, to make sense of their feelings, to make sense of their experiences, that kind of stuff. Okay. This is also, I find, an interesting way to represent gender and sexuality, the spectrum itself, okay, to reflect the fluidity. So the reason why I present this to all of you is for all of us to understand we cannot be living, secluded from the real world. The real world, we have this being discussed. Our children have been exposed or will be exposed for some of us on some of these topics. So I think we need to understand, okay, example, biological sex, for example, what the doctor assigned the person at birth, male or female. I mentioned this just a bit. In Islam, there's this thing called khunsa. And of course, gender identity, how you feel on the inside. The person may look like a male person, but he or she may be feeling more female rather than male. So this is what we call as gender identity. So as you can see, there's a little spectrum down there. Yeah, gender expression, how you present yourself to others in terms of masculinity and femininity. Okay, this is also something which you need to understand. Parents need to know. Okay, to understand where certain sources of information your children may have come from, may have gotten from. So the other one is actually gender presentation. Sorry, how the world sees you. Okay, how the world sees you. Do your friends see do the friends of your children see them as a man or woman, for example? Sexual orientation in terms of attraction. Who do you? Okay, this is also another broadband. Remember the earlier slide that I showed? Okay, all these things. There's some representations of sexual orientation, okay, being explained in the types of sexuality listed here. All right. Okay, so it is important for parents to understand certain reaction of children, certain questions that children may ask parents may come from this spectrum. So they need to understand, parents need to see. In the market, so to speak, today, there's already that concept that gender is not fixed. If you go back to the definition which I showed you earlier, it is already mentioned that sexuality is dynamic, it is changing, okay? So some people have even asked us, okay, does that mean that we are born with it? Okay, is there example? Is there a gay gene, for example? Okay, since we talk about all these things, biological sex and stuff. From my conversation, from my own research readings, okay, so far as of now, it is inconclusive as to whether there's this thing called a gay gene. Some of the latest reports that I read, the research show that there is no such thing as a gay gene, but some scientists believe that a grouping of such genes, whatever they are, plus external factors may contribute towards the person's gender identity, okay, sexuality, that kind of stuff. But as to whether there's a specific gene that will eventually dictate gayness, so to speak, so far, no scientists have found them. Okay? This is what we have. So it's like I can say that it is inconclusive. Okay. Okay, next, let's move on. So whether it is biological or environmental, this is a big debate out there. Okay, this is a big debate. One quarter will say that it is biological, we are born with it. Okay. Another quarter will say it is environmental. That means people, the environment within which a person is raised, being exposed to, would determine the way he or she eventually turn out to be. Okay, so this is something which later we can discuss. Okay, as far as personally, me and a group of other friends, even among the ulama that I work with, even currently, okay, as far as we are concerned, based on the text in the Quran and of course from the Sunnah, as far as we are concerned, every individual born into this world, okay, they are born with a certain gender, either male or female, I've mentioned earlier on. Whatever their feelings are, whatever their orientations are, environment plays an important role. We know in the Quran that every person born given the kind of faculty to make decisions. And even in Surah Al-Muluk, Alladhi khalaqal mauta wal hayata liyabluwakum ayyukum ahsanu amala. Every person, okay? When you talk about being born into this world, okay, Allah has created death and life to test, to see who among us are indeed best in our deeds. So there are things that Allah has presented to individuals as a test, okay? I've spoken to quite a fair bit of ulama, learned from them. And human beings, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, in general, every one of us have our own fair share of trials and tribulation. Eventually, who among us will succeed in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will depend very much, as far as Muslims believe are concerned, will depend very much as to whether we make use of the guidance provided to us in the Quran and Sunnah to actually resolve those trials and tribulation. Okay, this is another big topic to discuss. But as of now, the way I look at it, okay, this is something which we need to be able to handle with our children. In our opinion, the way in which people feel, people face with their life situations, many ulama and are subscribed to the idea, to the belief, and it's from the Quran too, that those are all trials and tribulation. So some are tested with wealth, some are tested with poverty, some are tested with sickness, some are tested with so many things, with power. So how do you deal with those things? And this is where the Quran and the Sunnah come in to eventually help us manage the trial and tribulation. Okay. All right. what do we look out for? Okay, what's the context of this? Actually, if you look at the objectives earlier on, children, based on my interaction with a lot of parents, the work that we have done with a lot of parents, children do demonstrate changes as they grow up, not just physically, but when we work with parents where children do face with certain issues, and when we get them to reflect, many a times feedback from parents indicate these are the kind of stuff that somehow presents telltale signs. Certain things may not be working so well, so to speak. Changes in moods, their behavior, suddenly there's a change in their habit to, relationship with your own siblings, with your parents, with your friends. Keywords here would be changes. The reason I say this is because I've come across quite a fair bit of cases where there could be traumatic experiences in the form of violence, in the form of abuse, and untreated, or worse, when family members try to cover, try to cover within the idea of not implicating anyone, trying to cover others. Okay, not uncommon for such abuses and violence to happen in the family, which eventually presents a traumatic experience to the kid, to the child, to the children, and that may affect many things in the lives of those children. One area that we have come across, and studies also show, is that such traumatic experience may change the way the child see himself or herself sexually. And that may even change the way he or she see gender issues. Okay. Just to quote one example, we have come across a case in which a girl was actually abused very young within the family, and eventually she developed that hatred towards the father, and eventually developed hatred towards men in general. Okay, and eventually she decided not to marry the usual way, but she decided to marry another woman. Okay? And she is a Muslimah, and I understand that she is also outwardly she looked like any other ordinary Muslimah, wearing tudung and all those things, but her hatred for men could be traced to those early years of abuse. Some even say violence, sexual violence, that eventually develop a kind of thinking about herself, about others, and shape her worldview of what gender issues are all about, sexuality are all about, and resulted in her eventually marrying another woman. Okay, this is just an example. So it is important for parents to eventually develop that strong bond with their children. What's that own self, check own self? So we usually hear that's an important term, own self, check own self. What it means is basically this. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, the way parents relate to their children, like it or not, is actually influenced, shaped by the way they actually were raised by their own parents. So in many of our programs, especially in marriage programs, we always tell couples to really check their own background, their own profile, their own experiences raised by their own parents, because that may even conflict with their own partner, and that may even contribute towards issues relating in parent-child relationship. So that's why own self, check own self. So you need to review whether certain behavior, certain thought processes that you have, would those things be healthy to develop that strong parent-child relationship or bond. So that's why I list down here your values and beliefs. Okay, one example, I've come across, there was one case in which we handled where the father believed that his role is only to cari makan. Okay, to go out there, bring food on the table and nothing else. No communication. So the mother got to undertake everything almost. Of course, the child get into trouble. We come in, then they were part of our program. So our role was basically to really get the father, and of course with the help of the mother, to rethink in which he viewed himself as father. Okay, example. Of course, in terms of action and behavior, he was distant from his son. Okay, he was not present, basically absent fathering, so to speak. And of course, communication level is very, very poor. The quality of communication is very, very poor. And of course, there are certain patterns and habits. This is not just based on the example, but there's quite a fair bit of others. Patterns and habits too very important. Okay, sometimes we have to break our own pattern as parents and habits, so eventually we can get across to our children better. Okay, important. For example, it is important not to have preconceived ideas on our children, not to prejudge, not to be presumptuous. For example, okay. Of course, over the medium and long term, it is important to look at the goals that we have. What kind of picture do we have in our mind between us and our children? Do we see ourselves as having good relationship, open communication, where we can listen more rather than giving judgment, or what? Okay, and of course, very important, building strong parent-child relationship. There's no shortcut. It is quite a painful journey for some parents. You have to really sometimes to unlearn in order for them to relearn new habits so that they can form bonds with their children. Today, children are not like last time. In terms of respect, it is something which parents need to learn to earn rather than expect automatic respect from their children. This is just an example. Of course, there has to be a lot of patience and dua, inshallah. Okay. So, very important. Do's and don'ts in navigating challenging sexuality situations or circumstances of children should they arise. Okay, this is just a few. I would like to hear from the rest too. Very important, please, parents. Should such things happen, please do not sever ties, do not cut ties, do not throw the children out of the house, don't ostracize. Okay, what is so important is eventually ... Okay, some clue given here lah. Okay, I think very important is for parents to actually engage, understand, listen, okay, where they're coming from, be less judgmental. More important is actually to really reflect. When you talk about own self, check own self, to really reflect, is it something which I've done, not done, which resulted in my child turning out to be who he or she is at that point in time when certain things are revealed to the parents, okay? What about unconditional love? Is it Islamic? Can we adopt unconditional love in navigating such challenging situations? Something which we need to think about. In my opinion, I've come across so many issues, so many examples of unconditional love that actually help kids to navigate and eventually become useful individuals. So many. The unconditional love of the mother eventually help the son or even the daughter to turn over a new leaf, lead better life, to become better individuals in general, not just good Muslims. So we can discuss that later, inshallah. All right. So I think roughly that's it. I think I've taken about 45 minutes, so to speak. Maybe we can jump into Q&A. Sekian. Wabillahi taufiq. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Thank you so much, Brother here, for the very insightful presentation. So yes, as we mentioned, we will now ease into the Q&A. Now, on to the first question. We are seeing more and more LGBTQ lifestyle and values being normalized into our society, and we are expected to accept them or to be accused of discriminating against them. How do you approach the topic on discrimination against LGBTQ group to our young children?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim is a very good question. I think very key is this. At the end of the day, when you talk about discriminatory act, we cannot discount the fact that those things do exist. But at the same time, we need to also understand why do they happen. Very key. Okay, I give one example. When society sees certain things being done a bit different from the norm, of course, many may not be equipped to handle such differences. Okay, but that does not give them the right to be discriminatory. Number two is this. We need to also ask further question, what do they mean by discrimination? As far as Singapore is concerned, frankly, in the market today, employment opportunities is all open, equal to all. But at the same time, we understand day-to-day experiences of some individuals may differ from one another. So in my mind, when you talk about discrimination, I think very key is this. It is to help them understand not everyone is able to handle differences in the way things are in society, in which sometimes even differences are being seen as discriminatory. So I think we have to be very careful about throwing labels too. In my mind, what is more important is eventually to be very specific as to what these discriminations are all about. It is very important for us to communicate with our children. The issue is not so much about discrimination, but the issue is about how to handle differences. Sorry, I may be repeating, but the way in which differences are manifested, handled, perceived could be read as discriminatory. Very important is this. I think the message with our children should be this. At the end of the day, whoever their friends are still friends. In Islam too, persons with a certain way of thinking, lifestyle, whatsoever, I think this is something which this Sunday, Ustaz Hanif will be handling in greater detail. All right. There's no place for discrimination. I think very important is eventually we need to be less judgmental on how we deal with others. I'm also very cautious because sometimes people in general take the easy way out, not being able to handle the differences and just throw the label of being discriminated against, which I think is also unfair. So we have to strike a balance basically. I think what we can work with our children is eventually we ourselves should not be discriminatory, but at the same time, we have to be mindful. Not everyone can handle differences in opinion, differences in action. Okay. So that is something which happened in every aspect of society, not just LGBTQ last time, in anything almost. Even in relationship, issues pertaining to racial relationship or ethnicity, for example, even between gender, between age too. Okay, so I think we have to be very mindful of that. So when we talk about discrimination, in the first place, when you talk about discrimination among young kids, I'm also pretty mindful because we do work with young children too. Okay, when you talk about discrimination, how deep and how complex is their thinking about discrimination? I think that we have to be mindful too. Okay, are they able to really think through about discrimination the way adults think about discrimination? So I think we have to address the issue of discrimination with children with greater mindfulness. I think what is key is eventually to help them to understand how to handle differences, and should they feel that they themselves cannot handle differences and their friends cannot handle differences. So I think best to leave the judgment part up there, not address. Give people the chance. I think that's very key. Always address the issue of so-called discrimination, that every one of us have our own weaknesses. So not everyone is able to handle their weaknesses perfectly, 100% well. That those imperfections may be seen as discriminatory, or sorry for repeating it, but at the same time, not everything that people do should be labeled as discriminatory.
So it's
Example. When we say in Islam, there's even a hadith about cross-dressing, for example. When we say that this is something which Islam does not condone, it does not mean that we are being discriminatory. But some people I've already seen that even saying such thing is considered as bigotry and discriminatory, which I think is not fair. Stating our point, our position should not be seen, should not be labeled as being discriminatory. Everyone has their own right to say their own position. So I think that's key. But I'm mindful of the word young kids. How young is young? We don't know. Because some discussions may be a bit too sophisticated and for young kids to actually understand. So if you approach from the point of view of weaknesses of individuals and from the point of view of how differences should be handled and how we should respect one another, I think that's key. So that our own young kid do not fall into the trap of looking at others in a discriminatory manner, while those others are simply stating their stand. So stating their stand and having a basis for their stand should not be labeled as being discriminatory in my mind. Allahu Alam.
Thank you so much, brother here. So it's about teaching our children the value of having respectful communication,
Yes,
navigating social interactions, and understanding that there are differences between
correct.
people.
That's right, that's right. Yeah.
So I think the next question is also quite closely related. I think this is more for preteens, so that's more specific. Sorry, Sis Hatim, I think back to the other question, the first slide. Yep.
How to handle, yeah, preteens.
Correct. So preteens, I think, are a bit more different. They are older. They're a bit more discerning. So how do we handle preteens thinking that Islam is extreme about LGBTQ, which is popularized in mainstream culture? I keep hearing the kids say Islam doesn't accept those people, although they were born that way. How would we then navigate that kind of conversation with our young?
I think what is key is eventually, I would address the first one first lah. Is it true that they were born that way? Okay, I've actually explained from our from our point of view, and also from data available around us, it is still inconclusive that people are born that way. That's number one. And when you talk about Islam is extreme, I think we need to challenge the meaning of the word extreme. Islam is not extreme, but again, I come back to the issue of being different. These are things which have been presented to be pretty different from what mainstream Muslims look at how Muslim lifestyle should be, for example. So being different should not be labeled as being extreme. There are bases upon which Muslims and, of course, Islam presents themselves that are being perceived to be extreme. We know as far as mainstream Islam is concerned, there's no two ways, there's no doubt that example like marriage is only between men and women. On the side, we also know, but when you look at the arguments about how some people say that Islam also legitimizes same-sex marriages, but the mainstream order of Islam is of course different. We stick to what we have learned all this while, and when something different appear, and when we present our point of view, that cannot be labeled as extreme. I'll give you one example. The recent Samsung advertisement, of all the examples they use is actually cross-dressing. When you talk about unconditional, as I mentioned, I've got so many examples in which Muslim mothers have actually helped their children who have gone wayward come back to the right path to become good Muslims, good citizens, even successful businessmen because of unconditional love. Why can't they make use of the example? Why should they make use of the example of that? Our Muslim mother wearing tudung, and then if they want to do it in private, it's entirely up to them. But when it is used as an advertisement, even though there's no mention of religion, Islam, whatever, but symbolizations do matter. For those who are experienced in marketing, branding, that kind of stuff, those things do matter a lot. So one cannot say, there's no mention of religion, there's no mention of Islam. Yeah, but symbolization is important too. Branding, marketing, full of such things. So it's not rocket science for us to actually see, what are they trying to do, no? So Samsung would have actually gotten greater support if the examples given is not of such things. Don't go into controversial areas. So this is what I mean. Okay. So when we express our point of view, that portrayal has crossed the line as far as the majority of Muslims in Singapore, and not in Singapore, by the way. I've got feedback, so people all over also not happy with the advertisement. So only not in Singapore. That cannot be labeled as extreme. We only say that is not what mainstream Islam and Muslims can agree with. It has crossed the line. By saying those things, we cannot be labeled as extreme. This is one example. I think parents need to be able to discuss with their teens, with their youth, okay, so that we know how to help them reflect. Differences of opinion, of stand whatsoever, cannot be seen as something extreme. So people got to be fair, like what you said earlier on, just be respectful.
Okay, thank you so much, brother here. Okay, let's go on to the next question. What is the best approach to speak with the children about sexuality aged 9 and above? So I think here is specifically on sexuality.
Okay, as far as children aged 9 and above are concerned, okay, today, from our work on the ground, today children aged 9, as far as their understanding of sexuality is concerned, is almost like during my time, children aged 13 or 14, okay, because of their prior exposure among their children or whatever. So when you talk about sexuality, I think it's very key. In fact, I would even recommend talking about sexuality, so to speak, or engaging about sexuality much earlier, so that they understand who they are. As I mentioned just now, okay, sexuality, we talk about the way they think, the way they behave, the relationship. So it's very key to approach from a standpoint where a child of 9 years, okay, that above is quite tricky because up to what level? We know in Singapore, primary 5, there's a topic on sexuality in the curriculum. So by the time a kid enters 11 years old, exposure, official exposure, formal exposure to sexuality would have been done at the school level. But at the age of 9 to let's say 10, for example, it is important. Maybe you can just start off with what? No, start off with the way they relate with their friends of a different gender and how they look at personalities on TV. That could be one way to just have a gauge as to, you know, the kind of inclinations they have, the kind of dressing that they have, for example. Okay, for some parents, I know even at the age of 9, they begin to talk about aurat already. Okay, but in Islam, those are part of actually part of the domain of sexuality to be discussed actually. And of course, very key is this. I've come across children as young as 7 or 8 who actually begin to explore their sexuality in terms of their genitals. They begin to play with it already, if you know what I mean. Okay, some have been caught, so-called by their parents or even by caregivers at childcare center for meddling with those things. And of course, they go around touching others. We can also touch with that. At 9 years old, I think parents, of course, many of these things, when you engage with your child of that age, it is very important to actually do it in privacy, not in front of others. Very key. You don't conduct a workshop at home about sexuality. Pull them one side, talk to them nicely. Okay, it depends. Also on certain issues. Okay, for example, it is important for father to talk to son on certain sexuality issues, for example, on the genitals, because it is authentic, male and male. Of course, mom will talk to their daughter. Age 9 is just nice. You may want to start to prepare, if you have a daughter, one area of sexuality would be the menstrual cycle. Get them to be prepared to face that. We've come across a child, a daughter, at the age of 8, begin menstruating already. And so that part will be some areas where parents may consider talking to their children about sexuality roughly at the age of 9 and 10. I think I won't go beyond 10 because by 11, they will be exposed to some of the stuff. And of course, in Islam, very key, we are encouraged by 7, we should separate their sleeping quarters. Yeah, okay. So these are part and parcel of sexuality education content in Islam too. So the best approach is very important. Please accord them the respect, give them the privacy, listen to them. Okay, but you must throw in baits for them to talk about. And please, when they talk about something that you seem to disagree, don't immediately go and scold lah. Cannot like this, cannot like, you know. So please be that listening ear. Okay, make them feel safe that you are someone that they can relate to, they can pour out whatever. And also those stuff lah.
Yeah. So children are generally curious, so
Yes.
we should be the first place that they come to us for reference.
Parents should be the first place. I agree.
Yeah, and also I was referring to your earlier question, earlier point on getting parents, like the father with the son. I think I've also heard that if the father or the mother is not around, to actually get a maternal or paternal figure, right?
Yes. Yeah. Should the father, for whatever reason, the father is not there, then the uncle, grandpa should come in. But I must also caution the age gap. With grandfather, their ideas about things can be quite different from father. So that part you have to be mindful. So get someone who's roughly about the age of a father, that can be more current in the way they think about stuff, about men's stuff. If you want to talk about sexuality stuff with a 9-year-old boy, for example, if the grandpa is too old, 70 years old, I think it's quite difficult. Okay.
Understand. I think the admin has also placed a link on the chat. It's a YouTube link about communicating sexuality education with your primary school children. So that might be helpful for some of the parents here. All right, question 3.5. In relation to the Samsung ad that was being taken down, Malay Muslim people really that sensitive? The ad made me tear. However, if our religion is really based on acceptance regardless, why is it in our society there is a need to raise such awareness to put down the ad? Is this overall kuno fikiran or backward thinking, or something that should be done but for religious organizations to have more awareness sessions about? Yeah, so I think this is people's confusion or sentiments towards the ads. What do you have to say about that, Brother Khair?
Okay, I think there are a few things here. As a corporate organization, Okay, making money. Positioning something, like it or not, this is one area where controversies bound to happen. Differences of opinion. It's not about whether being backward, kuno, whatever. No? That's not the whole point. Like it or not, when people get offended, we cannot label people who get offended to be kuno. The point is, isn't there a better way that can unite everyone, make everyone tear? Why not? So I think it is very important for us to understand. It is not, it's not just about being sensitive. It is about what is being portrayed. An example I gave, I did a posting. Imagine instead of that portrayal of a Muslim mom and drag queen, they put in a Hindu mother, and the Hindu mother actually celebrate slaughtering of a cow by the son. How would that gone with the Hindus then? I think that's important. So my point is about sensitivity. It cannot be society go about having no sensitivity at all to any important stakeholder in the society. It cannot be. We should be doing something that can unite rather than divide. Okay, find something that can unite all of us. We know it will not invite controversies, for example. So I think this is what the whole point is all about. I mean, this is the reason why also in Singapore we have the Religious Harmony Act, all those things. So I think this is not about overall kuno pikiran. Okay, it is not about being overly sensitive, but I think it is important to acknowledge, to respect certain boundaries. That's all. So Muslims in general, there's even a hadith stating that cross-dressing is a sin. So don't show lah. That will only offend Muslims. That's all. But if you want to do it in your own private sphere, that one is between you and God. We're not going to interfere. But putting it out and as an advertisement and eventually to make money out of the whole thing, I think is not right. Allah. Right. Personally, I don't think it's right. And when we express our opinion, it shouldn't be seen as kuno or being too sensitive. They have the right to express such things. We have also the right to say, this is not right. So be open, be respectful, that's all. And if Samsung have decided to put it off, so we should respect Samsung's decision. So I think there has to be respect all over. Otherwise, how do we live in a community, right? I think that's key. Allah.
All right, thank you, Brother Hian. Okay, next question, admin. Okay, yeah, I think this was in reference to your earlier point about how in the Quran, the men, right? Men 18 times and women 30 times. Then what about those who decide to change their genders? Are they not recognized? And wouldn't that be their own test?
Very, very good question. I need to restate the position that as far as being part of mainstream Muslims with mainstream ulama holding on to traditional views of the religion. Traditional doesn't mean their own. We hold on to the ties with eventually reaching out to the Prophet Sallallahu. Okay, there are two gender, male and female. Okay, so as I said earlier, if at the end of the day, should someone change gender, the accountability is between that someone and Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala. That's it. The life leading to that change of gender, whatever trials and tribulation, at the end of the day, okay, everyone has to make that decision. Okay, Islam has its own framework as to how to deal with every type of trials and tribulation. To what extent would a person having that trial and tribulation of being someone in transition, you understand? From a male maybe becoming a female, from a female becoming a male, okay, that period of transition before eventually there's exchange. To what extent, okay, of course, I've come across arguments that at the end of the day, rahmatan lil alamin, Allah loves everyone. And I've come across also some arguments stating a hadith qudsi. When Allah created the whole universe, His rahmah precedes His anger, so to speak. So that one is Him. But we are very clear as far as mainstream traditional Muslims are concerned. It is not permissible to go for gender change, sex change. So the thing is this: if someone still continues and proceed to do that sex change, I know some people view it as that's the test on him. But at the same time, if a person who has that feeling of being in a wrong body, physically male, but feeling inside is female, and yet consistently striving to lead a life of a male Muslim, overcoming that feeling of being a female, Okay, that striving itself in Islam is called jihad too. And at the end of the day too, there are a lot of guidance in our religion as to how to seek help from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala to overcome such challenges. Should that person in the striving of continuing to be a guy instead of a woman, while inside he feels that he's a woman, if you were to die, there's also reward for that. That's one line of thought that the person may have lah. The other one is, look, I cannot really overcome it, so I really got to go. That one we leave it to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. Okay, as to what happened. But as far as the fiqh is concerned, I'm not going into the sites where there's some fatwa, but taking mainstream fatwa in Nusantara, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, whatever, when a person dies, he or she is treated according to the gender born with. So, so that one gives an indication. So I leave it up to the individual to state, okay, if I'm so-called destined, the issue is how do we know that it's destined? Whereas in Islam, you are supposed to stick to this gender. Yes, of course, we have all the challenges. Of course, some people may have the challenges, the test of that transitioning. Some have others. Okay, but if you can proceed and work towards what we think Allah would want us to continue to be, there will be reward for them. Otherwise, I leave it. I'm not going to judge anyone, okay, for that matter. So we leave that to the judgment of Allah SWT in the hereafter. At the end of the day, there's also a verse which sometimes is being interpreted in another way, where Allah will not test anyone more than what one can actually handle. Okay, it means what does it mean? Every trial and tribulation that Allah put on us, eventually it can be overcome, because He will not give something which we cannot bear. He will give us something which we can bear, we can overcome. Okay, so I think that's something that we have to be, we want to think about. Okay, Allah Allah.
Thank you so much, Brother Khair. Okay, the next question. One extreme breeds another. How do we moderate approach in addressing gender or sexuality issues so as not to invite harsh criticism or backlash from others?
I think we have to be respectful. Okay, so that's why you see, knowing where people are coming from is important. So that's why upfront I provided, instead of providing Islamic definition of sexuality, I actually provided the so-called general ideas about sexuality. So parents need to understand. In the current world today, that's how sexuality is being perceived and understood. And it's not surprising if our own children actually would be discussing, behaving, believing based on those definitions, descriptions, understanding whatsoever. So I think it is important for us in general to really understand where those other arguments are coming from. I think that's important. And to accord respect in our discussions. But at the same time, that does not mean we need to bend our backwards. No, you really part until you become unrecognizable. I think that's very key. So both sides got to recognize that at the end of the day, this maxim that probably is overused, agree to disagree. It's maybe easier said than done. Because sometimes I see the moment someone disagree with certain opinion, labels start to shoot from any side. So I think that's key to understand. So at the end of the day, the respect, the civility must be there, but the readiness to accept that certain points raised by, let's say, traditional Muslims may be quite hurtful, because, give an example, when we say that from our belief, that cross-dressing is a sin. For some people, that's very hurtful. Okay, because someone in a member family or whatever could be cross-dressing for that matter. But we are saying things out of what we believe, and there's basis for that. And even I notice sometimes even how nice we say it, but somehow if there's hurt, there's hurt. Sometimes it can't be avoided. Okay. So this is something which we have to grow into, eventually we have to have the maturity to accept that eventually certain things can be pretty painful. So sometimes it is important, don't try to hide things. So if it's present the facts in the best way that possible, for me, I don't really mind. Sorry, these are the facts. If you feel offended, I'm sorry, but these are the facts. That's my approach, basically. Yes. And we can continue discussing these things. I've been engaging for many, many years. I've got friends who have different opinions, some very grave, but we are still friends because we respect each other. we value the relationship. I think that's key at the end of the day. Allah Allah.
And that will apply to ourselves and our children or relatives, right?
Exactly,
We have
exactly.
different
So I
opinions.
think it's very key, especially since tonight's session is very much about parent-child. As I mentioned earlier, today children, we cannot expect children to respect parents automatically. The respect got to be earned. That's why I would encourage parents to actually know more about, okay, here we're talking about LGBT issues. So we need to have the kind of knowledge and eventually able to engage our children in a meaningful way using the knowledge that we have. Otherwise, if you got nothing if you do not know anything, it's difficult to actually engage our children. That's why I would encourage parents to read widely, to understand where certain things are coming from. Okay, sometimes the way I would want to do is to entertain them first. Let them talk, because we need to understand what's behind their thinking, other presumptions. Let them talk, entertain, so and eventually we engage. And when we engage, we need to have all the information for us to share with them. Sharing is important, but without proper information, the right kind of information, it's difficult to engage and difficult to share. And eventually, I've come across many occasions when there's nothing to share, what comes out? Only these respectful remarks, which could be very hurtful. So that's where then things got blown out of proportion and things go awry. Okay.
Yeah. So you got to be one step forward and you got to be strategic in your communication with children.
Yeah. So I thought this session tonight is very important because I hope after this parents would learn more on what can be done, and maybe Perdaus can even provide more avenue for parents to get to know more information. Yeah.
Inshallah. Okay, on to our next question. Okay, I think this is a real question. Where do I get help or guidance if I think my son is confused about his gender identity?
Okay. You can contact us. Okay, we have a team of brothers and sisters that can actually help. Please don't get the wrong idea. This is not about the commonly misused and abused word, conversion therapy. No. I think very important for us to understand that engaging individuals who could be confused about his identity is important. Just engaging. We need to know where they're coming from. I think that's important, the source of that confusion, so to speak. This is bordering into gender dysphoria, which not anyone can suka-suka handle. Okay, so this is the reason why it is important to find the right place for such confusion to be addressed. Actually, for such issues, probably you can contact us, inshallah, and we will. We have a group, basically, inshallah, to help our parents to deal with this kind of issues among their children, inshallah. Yeah.
Okay, so could you explain more? Like you are a consultancy, so you are able to get cases or macam mana? Like,
okay, basically, we don't actively go out and look for cases. Okay.
Okay.
As and when, because prior to this, we have gotten several requests and we have actually channeled some of these cases to others too, not only us, they handle us. Okay, so it is important, very important. First cut intervention, so to speak, will be the counseling session.
Okay.
Okay, so we do have qualified counselors to just simply understand where he's coming from. We are not talking about trying to convert him whatsoever, no, but the first level of intervention is to understand, and that is a process that we know we have individuals who are capable of doing that. Just to help make sense of the situation, inshallah.
And they will be able, you will be able to work together with the family as well.
Yeah, I think that's key, and we are not alone. Okay, we're not alone. So we even have an asatiza in our midst who have helped to handle such cases within the family. Yeah.
I see. Okay, thank you so much. Next question. We are at 9:22. Let's see how many more questions we have.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, okay, ni Okay. Bagaimana caranya? Okay, I will translate in English for the benefit of our English speaking audience. What is the way to help a young lady understand that gender equality in Islam has its boundaries, because she often talks about these issues with four of her brothers. I'm not sure, older or younger brothers. So she seems to have some influence, I guess. Yeah, so I think the parent or the adult here is keen to know how to help the young lady.
Okay, very interesting question. Of course, generally, once we discuss sexuality, gender issues, another aspect of that would be gender equality would be thrown in. That one, not surprising. So this is all quite related, basically, gender equality and stuff. You will find in Islam, in the Quran, Allah states that man created, kawamun nisa. Basically, they are being given certain qualities to help protect women. It is in the Quran. It is not what we think we are now. And of course, women have their own strength. Okay, so basically, Allah created men and women to be different. So that difference is to complement each other. So that's why eventually the institution of marriage is also put together, putting men and women in union, so that eventually can lead life according to what Allah and the Prophet has actually prescribed to us. So when we talk about gender equality, I think we have to be, okay, I must also admit that within the family, the cultural context within which people have grown up, become adults, the culture of the family itself, sometimes may bring about issues on gender inequality. I give one example. How come when abang come back late, mama just keep quiet, and for me, when I come back only about 5 minutes late, you so that gives about a perception of gender inequality. Oh, abang got all this way, adik, but so that part parents need to be mindful too, So and I'm not blaming anyone, but probably such practices may have its roots from where the family origin came from. The father was done, was brought up that way. The mom was brought in a similar manner. So that the way they treat boys and girls to be, I've come across many references in the Malay Muslim community. Example, it is commonly understood. Some may disagree, doesn't matter, but it's commonly observed and even commonly reported that somehow boys in Malay families seem to be given a lot more freedom than girls. So the meaning of freedom, it is something which the girls look, but alamak, not fair. Boys got so much leeway to do certain things. So I think this one got to be addressed. Okay. So that part I cannot disagree, but girls will look at it as gender inequality. But at the same time, I think we need to understand in Islam, inherently, there are certain things already prescribed in the Quran. For example, from the point of view of faraid, distribution of wealth, if there is agreement among all parties involved, brothers, sisters, that the pie will be cut equally in agreement, no issue, cut equally, no problem. But bottom line, if there's no agreement whatsoever, some complexities, Islam provides a guidance. This is the way in which you may want to divide your pie. It is ordained by Allah SWT in the Quran, for example. So I think that's important to understand. Can we accuse of Allah SWT or His Prophet, of engendering gender inequality? There's always hikmah underlying all the prescriptions given in Islam relating to gender and relationship between gender, male and female. Seemingly, there seems to be inequality, but there's always this thing called equity. We must also, at the end of the day, look at life not only in this world, but also continuing into the hereafter. The accountability of men over women, the accountability of men for not doing certain things, protecting the woman folk, is a lot higher than anything else. So I think that part, we have to look at it from a more comprehensive point of view, not just from a singular, from a very myopic point of view. But at the same time, please, for parents, you really need to look at how you, quote unquote, provide that leeway, that freedom, the differences between boys and girls in the family. That's something which I'm not surprised if many girls today, express their disagreement and use the term gender inequality, which, very interesting, when we were young, okay, we don't have that idea. But today, parents, please, we cannot run away from the fact that our kids are introduced to such concepts, and we have to be mindful. Allah Allah.
All right, thank you so much, Brother Ian. Okay. Okay, so I think we are to take one more question. Is confusion regarding sexuality only due to childhood trauma? What about those who do not have that trauma or claim to be, basically they say they are claimed to be born that way, and how would that be counter-argued?
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good question. Whether they are the cause of that differences is by trauma or not, very important at the end of the day is to first understand where those things are coming from. Once those things are understood, and if necessary steps are already put in place, and eventually it's not really about trauma, but really about the feelings, then we have to deal with that. So at the end of the day, okay, that's why we cannot depart from guidance already put in place in Islam. We cannot depart from that. Okay. We acknowledge everyone has feelings, everyone has experiences. That one we cannot disagree. We must acknowledge everyone has that feeling. But what to do with those feelings? Really, what to do with those feelings? Okay. So what are the steps that we can take so that eventually we can help the person having that kind of feeling, okay, to review and reflect. Is this the way in which that person, that boy or that girl wish to go through? This is where guidance comes in from parents, right? So parents need to give the guidance. If the parents are able to provide the guidance, then probably seek some professional help to actually help the kid understand what he or she is going through. I think that's very key. So I'm not concluding that confusion about sexuality only come about from childhood trauma. Okay, it may come from other sources too. Whatever those sources are, at the end of the day, we have a decision to make as parents. Do you want to handle it according to what Islam suggests, recommend, or do you want to leave it as it is? Okay. As far as being part of mainstream Muslim community is concerned, we would recommend parents to actually seek help, okay, from asatiza, qualified counselors whatsoever, that can help the child make sense. Okay, eventually, if all avenues have been exhausted, in a respectful way, in a civil way, helping the child see things and all those things, but eventually, if the child insists to be who she or he feels to be, in terms of the gender identity, who they feel to be, it is his or her choice. So again, then we can refer back to laws and regulation of the state on how to handle that part. Okay, I think that one is another story altogether. So we need to really, I think it's not only about counter argument, it is actually about helping the child make sense. Okay, and understanding where the confusion lies. And the kind of specific feelings the child is having. And in Islam, how do we actually help the child understand that feeling? I disagree totally if methods used like, jampi serapa, or putting the child somewhere under the bright moonlight, doing some funny stuff, not in accordance to any Islamic practices, way out. That one totally out. I don't think that's to me that should not even be considered. What is important is to actually engage at a certain cognitive level, appropriate to the age of the child, because we also don't want to make things worse by creating greater confusion. So we need to understand it must be age appropriate. So that's why at some point, some professional help would have to be sought.
Intervention lah.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Okay, so adding, I think similarly, as from the work that you do you feel that there are more cases of dysphoria, or why does it seem to be like there are more cases now than previously?
I think it is not unexpected, not surprising, because of the flow of and availability of information. And when you say information, it's just not about text. It is actually about experiences, about what they see on, whatever media, not only just internet or whatever, and the friends, the kind of relationship they have. So these things do become more apparent. So they provide, like it or not, as defined by the sexuality explanation, description given earlier. That one is taken from the Sexuality Education Resource Center, where things are fluid, things are dynamic. So our children may be exposed to things that may eventually suggest there are other ways of living as an individual, since things are dynamic. Okay, so that option to be someone different, we cannot discount. So that contributes towards our children probably be given the exposure to probably explore. Yeah, maybe this could be one way. So we cannot discount the fact also the influence of the peers, influence of personalities, celebrities. We cannot discount those things. So they come as a complex mold that may eventually help or eventually lead our children to think in a different way, different from how we think about ourselves, our being, our sexuality, our gender previously. Now they see more option. So I'm not surprised, obviously, in our programs, these things do appear. Actually, not only this, there's not a lot of other options to do things in a very different way. So, so this is only one way. So there are so many other things that today life seem to suggest, about groundbreaking, game changing, all those things. Also, it's all about change. So this is not something surprising, actually.
Okay. Thank you so much, Brother Here. That will be our last question for tonight. Also, thank you to everyone for your participation. Our deepest appreciation for Brother Here, for your time, for the very interactive session. We apologize for any shortcomings on our end, and we're also sorry that we're not able to cover all the questions. Thank you so much once again, Brother Here. Jazakallah khairan. With that, we would like to close with tasbih kafara. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. And with Surah Al-Asr, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wal-asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilus solihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. May Allah bless and accept our deeds for the time that we spent tonight, and may it be beneficial for all. And inshallah, we'll see you next month for our next monthly date. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.